Going back to your blog posts, uh, how were they received in the academic and non-academic community? Do you know something about that? I'll tell you later. And how were they received by the Ukrainian and the non-Ukrainian audience? Maybe this you can know.
Well, um, I think that there was very much a dearth of information coming out of Ukraine at the time of Maidan, and as Oleg said very very cogently, I think that many of the Western press that came into Ukraine at the time were first of all parachuted in either from Moscow or from another region, and very often they didn't have they tried to interpret what was going on in the streets through lenses that were available to them. So there was a lens that was available of a nationalist coup or a fascist coup. So I guess that's what much of that was coming through, and I think that well, hopefully we tried to. I'm not going to say it's just me, because I think there was an awful lot of people who were involved in trying to get a different story out of Maidan. And by the way, Natalia Popovich is one of them. I think she did a fantastic job, and she's one of the people that organized just recently in Putin's speech during Putin's speech at the United Nations. She was the one that came up with the idea of bringing the flag from Ilovaisk and doing a demonstration, which got quite a bit of coverage. So I think that this is very much a grassroots effort, and a lot of people do what they can, which is what the Maidan story is all about.
Oleg, there was a contrast between your two presentations. In Mikhailo's presentation, we had the feeling that Maidan was a kind of extremely important moment from an intellectual point of view, when the researchers was 100% mobilized and the citizen was 100% mobilized. And in your presentation, we have this feeling of continuity of problems in the Ukrainian academia, in which Maidan actually disappears. Is it just the presentation, or how was it experienced on an everyday basis in Kritika?
So I just would like to respond to maybe 2 points from Mikhailo's presentation. One is the emotional aspect. Of course, emotion is important. I didn't try to downplay emotion. What I'm trying to point out is that for policy making, evidence-based approach and a rational approach is a better one, and that's my belief. Why? Because it allows you to analyze the situation, actually make a rational decision rather than just emotional decision. Of course, for mobilizing masses, when, as you put it, evil was committed to defend itself, to defend themselves, of course, emotional appeals are very effective, and of course, they should be used by all means if that's the case. But if we then return to state building, we cannot do without a rational debate and kind of this, evidence-based approach. That's one. Number two, I think there is a gradation in kind of what Mikhailo was speaking about and what I'm talking about in terms of combining scholarly activity and activism. I believe that we never stop being scholars, no matter what we do. But what we do changes. And the question is, can you do activism and do research and scholarship at the same time? And that's exactly the kind of that straddling, so it's trying to sit on both chairs, right? Mm-hmm. But I believe that when Mikhailo started doing all the activism, he probably stopped doing some of the scholarship that he would have done otherwise. What I'm trying to talk about is how can we remain scholars and still engage ourselves, engage in some positive way in that debate that is going on.
So what happened in Kritika during Maidan?
So the editorial board basically left and went out on Maidan. That's what happened. We have a significant delay right now in publication of the journal, primarily because for a few months we're there, and whenever there were calls for support to come out, everyone just left everything, dropped everything, and went there. We participated in all the media efforts. We participated in trying to kind of put out this voice of the Ukrainian intellectuals outside of Ukraine and kind of represent what's going on there from the intellectual perspective, the perspective of scholars. But the continuity remains, and I try to point out that there is a slight change in the approach, but it's very hesitant and very slow. So, and what I mean is the conceptualization itself of the Ukrainian situation, of the Ukrainian project, what we call, so the Ukrainian state as a liberal democracy, as a society that offers participation and realization to all the different groups, a society that is not a clerical society, right? So kind of we see right now a growing back together of church and the state, and many, many other things. So this radicalization, militarization of the society, this nativist tendencies that we saw before Euromaidan surprisingly are back, and surprisingly they are as strong or maybe even stronger than before. And it is precisely the reason why today, more than ever, we do need a rational debate.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted maybe to make a comment to change a little bit the terms of the debate. Because the question was straddling academia and social engagement, and we're talking up to now about policy making. And in fact, well, we're talking about power. Social engagement is maybe not only influencing policy making, it may also be something about the empowerment of NGOs, the empowerment of different associations in civil society, empowerment of state institutions that are working with different groups. And I would also change the terms of the debate, saying that, well, you're talking about is it possible to? I think that in some cases, it's not only a possibility, but an obligation, especially when there's something especially serious happening. I don't want to talk too much about it, but you cannot be an expert on Russia and see what's happening in Chechnya in 1909 and the fact that there's a whole population being exterminated and not say anything if you pretend to be an expert on Russia. So I think in some cases it is an obligation, first as an expert, but also to shift the way the questions are asked and the way the questions are on a broader arena, the questions are asked and formulated. And then I think that you must stay an academic all the time. I mean, you must anyway, whether it's you are acting as a social activist or as in an academic field, you must respect the rules of the game of the academic world. And that means especially using arguments based on sources that you can make public to let the others well, contest your own argument and your own engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you take each one of you 1 or 2 minutes to respond to all those remarks?
So thank you so much for your questions, and thank you also for support. I think I'm just going to try to respond to kind of some of the issues. Of course, I can sweep the floor very well, but I think I might be better equipped to actually make some educated statements. So I feel this is also about effectiveness. You know, what I mean by that is that, of course, you know, we don't have to always kind of direct our efforts at power or discourse formation, but given the intellectual ability and the kind of the training, I think we're better equipped to, you know, to emphasize certain issues and to bring them out when we see that this is what a situation needs. And of course, you're right when you say that this is an obligation rather than just a choice. So I totally agree. What I'm trying to point out is that, of course, we all have participated in kind of activism that is kind of more grassroots. And the example of Kritika's editorial office dropping everything and going to the Maidan is standing there in the freeze, protecting those kids who were dancing there and kind of, you know, trying to protect them, shield them from violence. We all did it. But what is more effective? Of course, that was necessary at the time, and so we did it. But what is more effective? You know, maybe it was more effective to spend that time and try to reach out with a certain message to the rest of the world that we are able to formulate, but those kids are not. So this is always kind of a strategic decision that we have to make. And, you know, given the training, the abilities, I think, you know, maybe it's better to make one decision over the other. But speaking about the, you know, which of the groups can be, to Margarita's question, which of the groups can be kind of tapped into, you know, getting more support for this kind of activities. But I'm trying really to kind of to talk about some very basic issues in Ukraine because no one, for some reason, talks about them. We have very few really intellectuals in Ukraine. There's a lot of intelligentsia, there's a lot of people who are educated, but people of intellectual kind of mind that dedicate themselves to that kind of activity, to questioning and critically thinking, are very, very few in Ukraine. And that also has to do then with the problem that we're facing, that kind of the need for rational debate is just not, rational discussion is not perceived, in the Ukrainian society, and that's a huge problem. At least in the West, we understand that we need that kind of debate. Talking about cultura and kind of connecting to, other strata of society, of course, it's very necessary. But what we are trying to do is to kind of avoid this missionary self-positioning. We are not here to enlighten people, and I think that it would be wrong to position ourselves in that way. We are trying to create meaning and to create contexts that can be used meaningfully by those people to conceptualize their own reality in which they exist. And I think we've been very successful at that, and I think that's part of Kritika's success. Unfortunately, not too many people see it because they are concerned with other issues. If I talk to a businessman in Ukraine, the first question is, what do I get out of it immediately? Kind of, what are the long-term benefits for Ukraine as a state, for society, are really secondary concerns to them. And so it's very difficult to get money for it. It's easy to get money for, orphanages and medication and for hospitals. And I understand that those are tangible goals, right? But try and get money for intellectual debate and try putting it that way, right? So there's gonna be a strong pushback.